We could have shortened that and just said I was a tech guy from Waterloo. Would have, I think, been very appropriate. I'm here in 10 minutes or less to talk to you about innovation and competition. And of course, that's a topic that we could spend the whole day on. It's quite complex, and it's getting more complicated as we become more global. If you're very interested in... Oh, I'm sorry. I like to shout, so all right. I'll be constrained and stand here for all of you. Competition and innovation is a complex topic, and one that the federal government has recognized as such. And in fact, there is something called the Wilson Report, which came out a year ago, that described what the formal name is Global Competition Policy Review Panel. And it really described and reviewed Canada's context in a global economy, as opposed to, let's say, the Macdonald Commission, which led to NAFTA, which was really about Canada being in a continental market, really defined by the United States and Mexico. So I would draw your attention to that document as being a much more learned piece than perhaps what I'm going to speak about in 10 minutes with a few slides. I had the great pleasure of being part of that panel, and it really caused me pause. I've spent most of my adult life outside my own country because I'm part of a company that has 95% of its revenues and activity outside of Canada. And so much of what I was learning was sort of a confirmation of what I had been experiencing. So I would really point you to that if you are interested in something perhaps more learned. But let me start with some very, very simple things that I think we can all agree with, that the world is hot, flat, and crowded, and will become more so. And that, of course, leads to issues of global competition. If the world is flat, if you're a student of Friedman, you'll start to realize that whether you're in India in a call center or in Halifax in a call center, hard to tell the difference. So it's starting to really have a huge impact on the way we organize our economies and the way we think about each other. And if you don't adapt to that, you're toast. And that is a huge challenge, especially for our country, because our country is so blessed with so many wonderful things that it would be very easy for us, as we look back at the last 150, to be fat, dumb, and happy. And of course, in innovation and competition, you can't be fat, dumb, and happy. You have to be lean and mean, and you have to be the fast runner. And so a big question for us as we come up onto the 150 is, are we ready for the next 150? And that's a real challenge, because so much of what flows from our culture in our society is really based on our ability to innovate and compete. So let's take an example, and this is featured in the Wilson Report. This is a global supply chain, and this, I'm happy to say, is Bombardier. And this global supply chain is quite remarkable and is competitive and really meets great innovation standards. But that's a supply chain based on economic partners of really the last 50 years, since the post-war era. And if we think about it, that won't be relevant. So even some of our most innovative companies that have built global supply chains, this chart is a bit of an eyesore, so I apologize for that, but it's an image of the world. In those bar charts, and we're just starting to experience this now, many of you are hearing the acronym BRIC, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Most economists forecast, and you can debate the time or the amount, but the vast majority of the world GDP is going to shift from an American-centric one to a BRIC-centric one. We can debate time and quantum, but virtually no one debates the shift. And are we as Canada ready for something like that? But there's something else going on at the same time. And I put this slide up because, you know, as a tech guy from Waterloo, this is something I'm more comfortable with. But at the same time as that big, you know, if you will, demographic shift of where the geopolitics and all that stuff is happening, we also have the sort of next era of the information revolution. Because remember, the internet and the fact that the world is flat is driving that previous slide. So now let's look at a computer screen. On the left-hand side is the old way, and on the right-hand side is the new way. The old way is text and email and what have you, and on the right-hand side, it's all what we call immersive digital. And the right-hand side is way faster, way more innovative, and way more competitive than the left-hand side. And we are creatures of the left side, and we ignore the right side at our peril. Because if you're in brick, you're starting right from the beginning. So they leapt several generations of telecommunications infrastructure. They didn't go through the cycles that we went through, they just simply went to mobile. And so this is somewhat representative of the challenge that we all have as Canadians going forward. And the best representation of it is Avatar. If you've had a chance to see the movie, great. If you haven't, go see it, because that is an immersive environment, and that is technically feasible today. Not to the extent that Cameron's described it, of course, but that concept of being immersive is very valid. Now, you might say, well, what does all that have to do with innovation and competition? Well, let's recast the left side and the right side again. On the left-hand side is a technical manual that would be used by Bombardier or Boeing, etc. And it's a manual that generally takes years to produce, and it's a manual that requires, if they make one engineering change to an engine, let's say, they have to go through and translate it, document it, get it into 50 languages, and that takes 6 to 9 months, because you've got to get it right for liability reasons and what have you. As opposed to the right-hand side, which is simply a video, which is language invariant and can appear on YouTube to show how to change a turbofan on an engine. I would ask you, which one is more efficient and effective? Well, the one on the right is. That is why kids today watch YouTube. They do not watch whatever, take your pick, CBC Global, ABC, NBC, etc. That's at the very heart of this, the ability to do things more efficiently and the embracing of technology. And on my list or tale of woe for you to consider is another problem that we have. The internet is like an iceberg. You think that if you go on Google and do a search and you get 100,000 documents back that's relevant or hopefully relevant to your topic, that you've surfed everything. Well, in fact, Google has perhaps 0.1% of all the information actually available. And the reason why is that most of the information is something we call the deep web. And the deep web sits behind firewalls and copyright protection and what have you. It could be your salary information, or it could be your employee review. There are reasons why Google can't or should not be able to get to all of that. That poses an enormous challenge, because much of the digitization that has occurred thus far has been free market driven, and really around the Moroccan bazaar idea that Google does it for you because Google is matching buyer with seller and draws revenue from that. And that's their economic model. And it's a great economic model. But again, it's a model that's only relevant to, arguably about 1% of the information. Now you may also say, well, so what? This is perhaps the greatest challenge facing innovation for our nation state, as well as all the other nation states, because there is no economic model that's apparent for digitizing everything under the water. And so what does that mean today? That means today that in Canada, if you're a student, or if you're any one of us, and we're searching for something relevant to Canada, where do you think we're going? We're going south. We're going across the border south. All the information that makes us Canadian, all the things that we celebrate about 67 and the kicking off of the tri-councils and all the things that we started to do at the century really is an issue now, because 50 years later, it's all in analog on bookshelves, and quite frankly, it's not relevant in the digital world if you can't get to it. We are in danger of becoming a digital colony. If we don't digitize everything that makes us Canadian, we're going to have a real issue here. We won't be innovative, and perhaps just as equally terrible, we won't be Canadians anymore. We will lose that sense of identity with each other. So there is hope. We do have a great basis in the country for digital expertise. And in fact, as had been mentioned, I'm part of the Canadian Digital Media Network, which has over 40 organizations with cutting-edge technology, lots of expertise and what have you, and we've been banding together to try and describe, and we have a conference called Canada 3.0 that occurs every spring, to try and describe what is it that makes a digital nation. And quite appropriately, I would think for this conference as well, this spring's conference is Canada at 150, what can we describe to be a digital nation then? And that's a group that'll be getting together in May to discuss what is it that would describe Canada as a digital nation. And the description so far as a working thing is that whatever you can do in the analog world, you should be able to do in the digital world. If we can achieve that, we'll make sure that all of the next generation are relevant globally. And really what this comes down to is, do we want to think this way, which is sort of the analog gears and what have you, or do we want to think that way? And that's really the challenge for us, I think, as we turn 150. Are we ready for the next 150? Thank you very much.